Well, everybody, this is going to be a great episode. I'm really excited about this because it doesn't matter what kind of business you have, you are having to work with people and you're having to have employees. And so I'm excited to have Mandy talk to us today on this topic. Welcome, Mandy.
Thanks, Scott, for having me. I'm such a fan of the podcast, so I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I know this is a particular topic that is really heavy on your heart, that you have a passion about this. And I know that it really doesn't matter what kind of business you have. It's just like I just said a minute ago. It's everyone is dealing with this, and I feel like it's different for everybody. So before we jump in, we always like to start at the beginning. And I'm kind of curious. I know that you have a flower shop, so why don't you give us kind of your journey into the world of flowers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually worked for my mom. She owned the shop before me. So she started it in 2000. It was a flower shop before it was Trillium. It was under a different name 5 years before that, and she worked for the owner of that shop just very part-time. And then when the owner decided he wanted to move away, he offered it to my mom first, and she jumped on it and said, absolutely, I will take it. But unfortunately, the previous owner had kind of ruined the reputation quite a
Oh,
bit.
that's
So
too
she
bad.
changed the name, started kind of from scratch, and rebuilt it to what it is now. So I was 14 when she took over the shop. So I did as any 14-year-old had to do, cleaning buckets, cleaning flowers, all the not so fun jobs, and just kind of worked for her through my schooling, through high school. Through my 4 years of university, I have a degree in multimedia and design. So the whole idea obviously was to get a job in my field. And in those 4 years while I was in university, I really fell in love with the business side of it. And she didn't really like the kind of being the face of the business and the networking and that kind of stuff. And I did. So I kind of took a lot of that on. And then when I graduated, it was like, well, I really like doing what I'm doing. I like the creativity of the floral design. I love the business side of things. So it just made sense to stay on. And also I wasn't finding the jobs that I wanted in my field. So
Sure.
I just kind of stayed on full time. And of course, working overtime during wedding season and Valentine's days and all those. And then when it came time for her to retire, it just made complete sense for me to take over, even though that was never really the plan. But I knew the ins and outs of everything. So
It was
yeah, that
natural.
was in 2020. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow, that's natural. So where are you located?
We're in Ottawa, Canada.
Okay.
So Canada's capital.
Yeah. So I don't think we've had another Canadian flower shop on before, so I'm excited about that. And kind of not that there's really any difference from that than anywhere else, but it's still kind of neat to reach out beyond our northern border a little bit.
Hmm.
And okay, so um when you grew up in the shop, when before you took it over, what was kind of some of your like main responsibilities?
So I became our wedding consultant when I got married the first time. I'm married twice. That was in 2011, so probably 2010 when I was planning my wedding. Um, Brides could really relate to me, even though I was like 24, and they kind of looked at me like, "Oh, can you do this job?" sort of thing. As soon as I
Right.
mentioned I was planning my wedding, they're like, "Oh, okay, you're qualified." So I really just took on the wedding side. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that like level of detail, and yeah, it was just really cool. I enjoyed the process, so that's what I did. Um, Pretty much full time, answering emails all the time. You know how it goes. Before that, we shared the weddings with all the employees, and nobody else really liked it, so it wasn't going well. So I'm like, you know what? Why are people doing things they don't like? I'll just take it all over. So I was that. I did our web design from my background with multimedia and design.
Wow.
So I did all of our website stuff, our social media, our design ads, our print ads, pretty much everything
Wow.
except for the trying to think what I didn't do. I didn't write the paychecks for the other employees, but I did the bookkeeping. I did
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. Well, that's great. Well, I think you know, eh, when you are part of a business that has so many years, associated with it, it has like a legacy, it has like a, it has its own entity. I think that's really neat and special because I feel like, a lot of times as people start their business, they're trying to navigate and figure out kind of, okay, who are we and what are we and what is it, what are we about? Now, as you now have taken over the business, what is the gist or what is the main thrust of your business now? Do you kind of still do everything, or has the years and the pandemic, I mean, how has that kind of
Mm.
changed what your business looks like?
Yeah, so I've kind of moved away a little bit from weddings as much as that was my main job and my focus
Sure.
before. Um, I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been doing it for so long that I've kind of lost the passion for that side. I mean, I love funky weddings, as you can tell for those who see me on video. I have a bit of a different aesthetic. So I do love the fun and colorful, funky, themed weddings. But after a while you get sick of the Pinterest weddings and the
Sure.
baby's breath and all the trendy stuff. So the weddings that I do take, I really try to get the ones that still fire me up and give me some room for creativity. So we're kind of slowly moving away from that. We did take on quite a bit last year just from the all the postponements from
Right.
COVID
Right.
and that kind of stuff because we pretty much had to. But the everyday stuff is keeping us busy. We're in a high tech park, so we have tons of companies surrounded us, and a lot of residential too. I just read in the newspaper today we're getting all these new apartment buildings in our area, so a lot more residential is coming our way in the next 3 years. So I'm really hoping to build up more and more of the everyday side of things and the floral subscriptions and that.
Sure. Well, that's great. I mean, it's always nice when you start having, people come into your community, new people, new potential clients, and things like that. So,
Mhm.
that's great. Well, I'm just kind of curious. I know when we talked last year about you coming on the podcast, one of the things I knew was sort of your passion was the whole idea behind hiring and training and all of these aspects, which a lot of times I feel like business owners, it's not a fun thing to do, I think, and I think that sometimes it gets pushed to the back burner, and I don't know, I feel
Mhm.
like sometimes it really impacts the whole process, that attitude or
Mhm.
mentality, just because it's not always convenient. So I'm kind of curious, how did this idea, and you might be able to phrase it better than me, but this idea behind um how to transform your business as far as making it employee friendly, I don't know, maybe you have a better way of putting it,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying, what tell
Yeah.
me tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've found that in florist groups on Facebook, especially, that seems to be one of the biggest pain points is either florists are just like, one man show kind of thing and just burning out and trying to do it all, or they've had employees and had bad experiences with employees, so they don't want to go there again. But I really feel like having employees is crucial to growing a business. If you're doing it all, you're probably not contributing a lot to the growth side of things. We all have that list on our phone that we add to at 3 a.m. with, oh, that's a great business idea. Oh, I should do that. I should do that. You're probably not getting to it if you're running everything, if you're
Right.
cleaning the flowers and doing the arrangements and doing all the logistic stuff. So it gives you that breathing room to be creative, which is what we are at the end of the day. And we're not just creative with flowers, we're creative with business ideas, and sure, we're florists, but we're also business owners, and a
Sure.
lot of people tend to forget that. So yeah, just creating that space, that mental space, that physical space for new ideas and growth, and to give you that time to go out and get that business if you're a networking kind of person, and go hand out those flowers and say, hey, we're here. And that will get you new orders. So there's definitely, yes, it takes a lot of time, and I think that's what a lot of people are scared of. It's, oh, I don't have the time to train, I don't have the time for managing people, but at the end of the day, it's super worth it. And, if you want to grow your business, if that's your goal, then, it's not that scary.
Right. Well, having grown up in a business and sort of, seen how it was kind of done before you, and now you have watched the trends or you have listened and learned through this process. What are what are some differences as far as, I don't know. I don't know where the best place to start is, whether it's hiring or maybe just management style with employees, 20 years ago versus today.
Yeah, it's huge. And even my dad and I have had lots of talks about this because his background is high tech, which that was his whole working career, was in high tech and big companies that there was managers and, higher ups and higher ups. And he said none of them were trained in how to be a manager, how to be a boss. And so obviously, if these big guys aren't being trained on that, obviously us smaller guys aren't trained on that. There's very little resources. I went looking when I took over the shop because being a boss was one of the things I was most nervous about. I wasn't really looking forward to training people and that whole process, which a lot of florists are scared of. So I went looking for podcasts to listen to, articles to read on how to be a good boss, and there's like nothing out there. So yeah, I can only assume like 20 years ago it was probably like how to be a good boss for dummies, because those were all the rage back then.
Ouch.
But yeah, like you were saying, with different management styles, like it might not be for everyone. And I think personality types has a lot to do with it. I'm a very outgoing person, so the more people I get to meet, the better. And I love having people around me every day. If I worked by myself day in and day out, I would probably just lose the passion, because I don't have other people around me kind of firing me up and to bounce ideas off of. And that's huge. Even just having somebody who to listen and somebody who can kind of sympathize with what you're going through is huge. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I'm curious. I'm curious too. It's like when, what you have learned and you apply now, was a process after working with your mom for a while. And she had a style probably for training and employees, and you were young. I mean, like you said, you were 14 when that started. How would you say your style is different from her style?
Yeah, so when she owned the shop, she would kind of delegate to me to do the training for any new employees we had, which I hated, which is probably why when I took over the shop, I wasn't looking forward to it. It turns out it's a completely different experience and I enjoy it now. But it's harder training somebody for somebody else than for yourself. So my mom and I had two different ways of working, two different ways of training people. So it became very hard when I would train them. I would say, okay, this is how I would do it, but this is how she would do it. So you kind of decide which way you want to do it, and you might get in trouble if you pick my way, but I think it's the better way for this reason. So it created some issues. And then when I took over, it was like, okay, I can train these people the way that I want to train them, and then there's no communication issues and
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, I understand. Well, let's start kind of at the beginning. Like when you want when you're looking to hire somebody, I know it just seems like ever since the pandemic, everyone's looking for people. And I'm kind of curious, what do you think are the first steps when it comes to that process?
Well, one big thing that I find is everybody should be doing it, but nobody is doing it. When you read job ads, they're so boring. And we're not in a boring field. We're in a creative field, and I'm seeing these florists writing these job ads that just sound like it's a desk job or an office job, and I'm like, okay, does that really signify or symbolize what it's like working with you? Probably not. It's not a boring job. So why don't you write the job posting with a little bit of excitement or a little bit of personalization, or a little bit of humanizing to it, I guess. So for example, for me, we have a coffee shop in our mall that I'm there like pretty much every day. I'm friends with the owners. Um, yeah, I'm there all the time, especially those Friday afternoons when you're doing wedding work and it's like, oh my God, how are we gonna get through this day? We go and get some coffee.
Right.
So I put that in the ad, like, hey, come and, go and grab a coffee during your shift or whatever. Like just to kind of make the job seem fun.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's kind of neat because you end up kind of creating a different sort of atmosphere with it.
Mhm.
Um, is anything else that you include in those things? Like, how detailed do you get into the position, or does that carry through, or the experience level and things?
Actually, for me, I don't really ask for experience, which I know a lot of people do. But I tend to prefer to train from the ground up for a number of reasons. But I feel like if you're creative in a different way, it usually translates to flowers. I will do a design test. I will kind of throw them in and have them make an arrangement during their interview, and I can usually tell if it's there or not. It's probably not a sellable arrangement, but I can see if, the shape is there or the color theory is there or something. If there's something to work off of, then they're probably going to be a great florist. So I personally don't ask for experience. I know a lot of people do, but
Sure. I know one of the things I thought was fun when we talked was that you are real big into kind of personality tests.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a personality quiz or test called MBTI. It stands for Myers Briggs. I forget what the TI stands for, but if you just Google MBTI or Myers Briggs test, it'll come up. And there's 16 different personality types, which sounds like a lot now, but so you get 4 letters that describe you, sort of thing. And I usually will ask potential candidates if they've done it, if they know what their type is, and that will tell me a lot about their strengths and their weaknesses. And then I can kind of cater the training to them in a way that they'll enjoy, in a way that will kind of connect with them more. So you're kind of personalizing the training experience a little bit. And my first hire, I found out she's an INTJ and I'm an ENTJ. So the only difference we had was extroverted versus introverted. So it was like a home run from the get go. So that's great, and we always joke about it now. She's still with me 2.5 years later, and she's awesome. But yeah, we were both very intuitive, and my line for her is she always, if she's doing something, there's a reason. So I never second guess what she's doing, even if I don't quite understand why she's doing it. It's for a very good reason, and I trust her wholeheartedly. So yeah, definitely the personality types I find, just knowing about myself too, what my strengths and weaknesses are. And I think it's really important to tell your employees what your weaknesses are. And I know people don't like to admit that, but then it can help fill a hole. Hopefully you're hiring an employee or two who can fill your weaknesses.
Right. No, I can see that. Do you feel
Mhm.
like, so if they don't know, do you have them go take the test before you go farther?
It's not a requirement for me to hire them. If I've hired them and they haven't taken the test, usually it's just like a fun thing we'll do during work.
Okay, but I mean, but that's okay. But that's kind of a fun thing that
Mhm.
you still try to do it,
Mhm.
and I think that's really cool. Um, do you especially COVID changed so many different things. When you are interviewing somebody, how does that process for you? Do you just let anybody and everybody come in, or do you have kind of a like a first process, second process, kind of walk them through, or how does that
Yeah,
work?
so I'll usually do a phone interview first just to kind of save time and weed out kind of the initial bad ones, we'll say.
Yeah.
I always like to take note of if they're following what you asked for. If you asked for a cover letter and a resume, are they sending you those? Did they follow those details? Did they have to reschedule for any reason or multiple times? I
Hmm.
had one person who rescheduled 2 times, and I was like, you know what, this person is obviously not serious about this. And that was just the first interview. That wasn't even the second one. So yeah, you just have to listen to those, red flags and go, okay, maybe they're not taking this seriously, or this isn't the right fit. So we'll do the phone interview first. I'll have kind of a list of questions, conversation starters, just to get them kind of comfortable with talking to me, and then into the questions you have to answer, or you have to ask, and then getting into their past experiences and that kind of stuff. So once I've kind of okayed them from that first interview, then I usually pick my favorite 3, and then I'll do an in-person. And like I said, I don't ask for experience. So usually I'll find a YouTube video that shows a quick how to make an arrangement out of grocery store flowers or something. I'm not sending them like these really high detailed videos or anything, just a very basic one. I'll send them that like a couple days before the interview. Then they come in, I give them free reign to pick some flowers out of the cooler, and then basically watch them make the arrangement and chat a little bit more. And then usually I try to plan all those 3 in the same day, and then that way by the end of the day I pretty much have a pick.
I feel for it, yeah. So that's interesting. So then, as far as continuing their training, if they don't have experience, what steps do you take for that process? Because I know that's one of the questions we get a lot here is, people looking for education and trying to improve their skills.
Yeah, so I have an employee training manual that I started writing from the first person I had to train, because if you're going to be doing it over and over, you might as well document it, and that way you're not having to start from scratch each time. So I have the full version, which is super detailed and many pages, but then I also have a 1-page version, which is just like a checklist, so that I can remember, okay, it's day 5. I've taught them how to do funeral arrangements. I've taught them how to do everyday arrangements, but I haven't taught them how to do wedding bouquets, kind of thing. So just kind of we check that off as we go. But yeah, the full version is quite detailed, and we just kind of go at their pace, go at whatever pace is going well. And I try not to pressure them too much at the beginning, just try to make sure that they're comfortable with the setting, and whoever else they have to work with. That's also very important, is making sure that not only do they get along with you, but it's important for them to get along with the other employees, because if you're taking your day off or on vacation, you want to make sure that they get along and they have good communication between them. So that's very important.
So gosh, that sounds like taunting. That sounds like really hard, a big task to come up with a training manual. Is it, especially with all those steps? So is this something that you just came up with over time, and then now that's what you use?
Yep. Yeah, I will add to it. Every time I train somebody new, it's like, oh, I forgot to mention this, or maybe we run our ordering differently than when I first created it. So it's always updating. It's always on my desktop so that I can see it and review it. But yeah, I think it's super important, because that way you're not missing those important details, which I have in the past and I've learned.
No, but I think that's good. I mean, I know that we've had other people on the podcast before talking about other parts of the business, and how good or how important it is to create these processes just for efficiency. Like you said, you have the checklist, you go through, you make sure they know the basics on how to do these things, and then you just continue to evolve from there. I think that's really awesome. What other things do you think you do? I'm not thinking straight. 1 second. It's always fun to edit myself. So there you go. I hear a lot, especially with these big companies like Google and Apple and all these people, they talk about company culture or
Yes.
business culture. As you're hiring, especially with the current generation, I mean, how do you approach that? How do you feel about that? Any tips?
Yeah, I definitely like the way things have kind of shifted. Before, it was like a job is a job, and you go to work and then you go home, and that's that. Now it is a lot more about the culture and actually enjoying what you do. Especially in our industry, a lot of people think like, oh, you're playing with flowers all day. How can you not enjoy what you do?
Right.
Well, there are toxic environments where even floristry might not be super enjoyable. So planning staff activities is one thing that I do regularly. So it's usually on a Saturday. We close at 2. So assuming we get kind of everything cleaned up and the cooler done and all that stuff by 2, then we have a couple hours in the afternoon to do some fun stuff. So things like taking a calligraphy course we did once. I think I'm the only one who still uses it, because when I write my wedding thank you cards, I'll make them all pretty, but it was still a fun thing to do. Doing a color theory course, even like going on a road trip to like
Yeah.
a botanical garden, going to our wholesalers. We only have one in town. We have a lot of flower farms in the summer, but we just have one wholesaler in town. And I always make a point of bringing my employees there at least once so that they can see that experience, because it's super fun for us. We get to go shopping and walk into this huge cooler, but they don't get to see that too often. So I think it's nice too for them to see the whole process, because they're not really seeing the ordering side too much. Unless you're delegating that to them, but I would think most owners do the ordering side. So it's cool for them to see how it goes from wholesaler to us and to customers. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fun too. And I think I don't know, I just feel like it's a way to invest personally in people.
yeah, for
And
sure.
I don't know, I feel like so many times, especially this generation, being authentic and connecting
Hmm.
on, and I don't know, I see a lot more companies doing things like this.
Hmm.
And I think, oh wow, that must be really fun to work somewhere that does that.
Hmm.
And I always think, what is really the long-term impact of that? Like, how does that really change people's,
Hmm.
perspectives on where they work?
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
What kind of feedback do you get from it when you do those things?
Well, I would hope good. Yeah, it's always good to kind of have fun, and also kind of gives you a chance to connect on a personal level too. Because when you're in shop mode and it's go go go, get these orders out the
Yeah,
door, you're not building any kind of relationship. And not to say that you need to be friends with everybody in the shop, but it's nice to have that connection, and especially when you're working in such close quarters. You kind of have to have that personal connection, because you're not going to be working in silence. You need to talk about things. So you're going to talk about what you did on the weekend, or your partner, or details like that. So that's why I think it's even more important to make sure that the personalities kind of mesh well, and everybody gets along.
sure. So, what do you feel like has made the biggest impact on your employees and your relationships with them, as you have developed sort of this mentality around hiring and employees?
Hmm. Well, I think, like, sure, there's the fun side, and there's the fun activities and that kind of stuff, and like I said, you don't have to be friends with them, but it is important to have that side. But you also do need to be a boss at the end of the day. So one thing I do like to do, so I have a 3 month probation period, and once they've reached the 3 months, if I've decided to keep them, that's usually when I'll do an employee evaluation. So it's one I've just kind of grabbed from online and kind of made it my own, but going through just kind of how they're doing. And so I like to sit them down and go through that with them, and kind of strengths and weaknesses, and that kind of stuff, and just points of that they need to work on. And it usually goes over really well. And usually I'll do those on a regular basis, maybe 6 months after that, and then a year after that. It's just nice to have those times to just go over everything and just say, here's a few things to work on, but you're really strong in these aspects. And that was something that my mom never did. She was scared of them, and I think a lot of bosses are scared of providing that kind of feedback. I think they see it as criticism, but I like to use the word feedback because that's less aggressive. And I mean, you are providing feedback pretty much on a daily basis, but it's just nice to be able to sit down and evaluate all the different areas of their job and provide that information. And it's always back and forth too. I always ask them too for feedback and say, is there anything that I can do better to make your job easier or to make those tasks better for you? So it's always a back and forth conversation. It's obviously not just me sitting there and dictating to them why they're not good at their job. It's usually more 90% why they're really good at their job.
Well, I think that's important, that what you just said. But I agree with you. I think a lot of times people don't want to have an evaluation because they feel like it's a very confrontational conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make it not be that way? Because obviously, I think that sometimes, and I think you hit it, you kind of hinted at it just a second ago by saying, you really try to stress the positive too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
For sure.
and I think that might be part of the key to it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a theory in the business world, and now I've heard that you're not supposed to do that, but the theory was with every negative, you have to have a positive. So if you're providing some kind of criticism, make sure you include a positive with that, which I do feel is a good way to go. So you're not always focusing on the negative. I know in the beginning it's really, really hard because you're training somebody new, so they don't know how
Right.
things go. So they're probably going to be making a lot of mistakes. So you don't want to point out, 20 mistakes every day as they're learning how things go. So you do want to balance that with some good points.
Sure, sure. Well, and I think too, it might depend on what their position is.
Hmm.
I I feel like too, I like the idea of the 3, 6, and 12 month, like doing it more
Hmm.
often, because then maybe
Hmm.
it doesn't seem so daunting when you're looking at,
Hmm.
these long periods of time. But I also think too, I know that I worked for someone at one point where they did the 90 days thing or the 3 month, deal.
Hmm.
And it was a very open-ended thing. I was really kind of surprised by it actually, where their attitude was, it wasn't as much, whether you fit here, but maybe you don't think you fit. It's like it was that it was a door that could work for either person.
Oh, okay.
If the employee was like, what, this isn't a good fit, it was okay. It was like
Mm.
no hard feelings. But then if
Mm.
it was, for you the same way, you know what I'm saying? It was kind of like it's
Mm.
sort of like a honeymoon. We call it a 90-day honeymoon.
I
And
was gonna say, kind of sounds like a dating
yeah,
thing.
exactly, exactly.
Like we'll
Um,
date for a month, we'll see how it
yeah,
goes, and if we're both a no, then but no hard feelings.
that's right. Well, yeah, and I mean, but yeah, at the same time, it takes pressure off, but yet it's like
Mm.
you don't have a permanent position here yet. It's like
Mm. Right.
I think that's I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a good HR person, so I'm really probably not the person to be talking about this. But I at the same time though, I know that people really come into employment now with a different set of expectations
Mm.
and a different paradigm than they did even before the pandemic. I mean, like in just the last 3 years, I feel like it's changed a lot. Have you
Mm.
seen that?
Yeah, for sure. So when I first, well, actually, when hired my first hire, that would have been fall of 2020. So shortly after COVID started, I had way more applicants that time around than when I hired last summer. So you would think it was still COVID time in 2020 that the applicants would have been really low, but I think that was a time when, stress was high and anybody who saw a job in a flower shop was probably going to jump on it because that sounded like a relaxing
Right.
job,
Right.
right? So that's probably what that was. But definitely I've noticed in my area, same with everywhere else, everywhere has a help wanted sign. And every wedding venue I know right now is looking for servers and helpers and coordinators. So haven't noticed that so much in the flower world, just because we have that reputation of it being such a fun job. So
Well, it is until people realize, oh, there's buckets, scrubbing buckets involved,
yeah,
and
yeah.
trash and late nights and
You have
door,
to work till 2 in the morning on
yeah,
Valentine's
and
night.
thorns and everything else. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's always or if you're a flower farmer, it's the weeds, it's the
Oof.
hot, it's
Oh
the
my
cold,
gosh.
it's all that too.
I could not do that job. That's a totally different job.
Yes, it is one we
My
need though.
sympathies to
Yeah, one that we
them.
need. So, I feel like too, one of the things that I see directly and firsthand a lot of times is communication. And
Mm,
I almost don't think you can communicate too much.
mm.
Um how do you communicate with everybody? Does everybody have an email? Do you have team meetings? How do you approach that kind of level of communication with your team?
Well, we all pretty much work like quite often with each other. But on the days that I'm not there, they both have my cell number, so they can text me whenever. It's usually over text. Is that that's the best way? Um, but yeah, when we do our staff activities, we kind of make it a meeting as well. So
Oh,
if we're
okay.
all sitting down at a table doing a calligraphy course, we might as well for 5 minutes touch base, make sure everybody's good, and iron out any issues. So, but also usually after big occasions like Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, usually once I've kind of regained my sanity, I'll go to work and I'll bring up my notepad and I'll say, okay, guys, tell me what worked, what didn't, what we can do better next time, while it's fresh in our minds, and just get that on paper so that I can save it for the next time and do it a little bit better.
So how are you with their feedback? Like, is that really I mean that's sometimes hard, I think. I think it's
Mm.
hard to give it and I think it's hard to receive it sometimes, especially
Yeah.
because you've been doing this for a long time.
Mm.
Do you walk away with a different perspective, or do you walk away thinking, wow, you're right. I never thought of it like that.
Most of the time I say like, oh, that's really good advice, or no, I didn't notice that. And I always tell them from the beginning, I say, I'm an open book, like ask me anything, tell me anything, I won't get offended. And that's just in my nature. I think that's part of my personality type is I don't get offended by things. And like I said, I always tell them my strengths and my weaknesses. So if here are my weaknesses and I know they're my weaknesses. So if you tell me something that I'm bad at that falls in that category, I'm probably not surprised. Um, Kind of a funny side story. There's a wholesaler in my area who she kind of knows everything about everyone. And I was talking to a florist about her, and she kind of said that she didn't like that she was in everybody's business. And she said, just think of what she's saying about you. And I said, well, whatever she's saying about me is probably true. So
Oh my gosh, that's
I
so
don't
funny.
know. I appreciate feedback, whether good or bad, and luckily my employees balance it out as well, the good with the bad when they're giving me feedback. So I don't know. Nobody really gets offended, which I appreciate. And like I said from the get-go, I always say open communication is super important here. Um, it's not a catty place. It's not a dramatic place. It's not high school. So, if you have an issue, bring it up right away. Don't just, leave it in the back of your brain and then blow up one day. That doesn't do anybody any good. So,
I like that a lot. So I'm curious, having grown up in this shop and having now it's being your own shop, what do you feel like has been one of the hardest challenges for you in growing up through this process and owning a flower shop, because that's not easy.
well, the hardest challenge was taking over a flower shop during COVID. That
Mm,
was insane. We were so busy. So when COVID hit, I hadn't taken over yet.
right.
And so we closed right away. It was like 50-50 in Ottawa of the shops that closed and the shops that stayed open. So it kind of created a rift in the city, but we're over it now. We're all friends again. So it's all good. But we were one of the shops that closed because we didn't know what was happening. So, the plans were kind of on the way for me to take over, and then that just came to a halt. So I was really scared that the business I was about to take over wasn't going to be a business anymore. But then our florist friends who did stay open, Easter happened, and they said, wow, we had like the best Easter we've ever had. So if you guys are going to open, like open for Mother's Day, because if you don't open, you're going to regret it. So it was just my mom and I. We didn't hire back the employees. We had to let go. It was just her and I. We decided, okay, we're just going to open for Mother's Day weekend, and then we'll see how it goes. And so we busted that week, and we worked so long, and we got online ordering set up, which was one good thing about COVID. We didn't actually have online ordering until then. We got a grant from our local business organization towards helping small businesses get their online ordering set up. So we got one of those grants. We got online ordering up, and that took all our orders, which was great. And so we were getting all the emails that you got new order. And so we did that, and then we decided, okay, there's still a business here to be had. Let's keep running by curbside, and then we'll see kind of in the fall how things are for me to take over. So things were really, really busy, even though obviously we didn't have weddings, but just the everyday stuff was so busy. So that's when I took over in September, and things just kept on. There was no downtime for probably 2 years, I guess, 1.5 years. It was just go, go, go. And those times, those months when you think, okay, I'm gonna have a bit of breathing room, those didn't come. It was just go, go, go. So that's why I had to hire employees, which I probably would have just worked by myself had I could have, but there was just so much to do that I needed the help. But yeah, that was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, just that constant go and the stress of it all. And I look back at some emails to like my bookkeeper, and I kept apologizing. I'm so sorry for the delay. I'm so sorry. And I'm not that kind of person. I'm always on emails. I'm always ahead of the game. I'm always 10 steps forward. And so to see, looking back, me writing those emails where I seemed so stressed and not myself, I'm like, oh my God, as if I had to go through that. And I'm so glad now that craziness is over.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, I know that that was such a challenging time for so many people, especially you taking over an existing business that you grew up in. I mean, that was scary in itself. I'm kind of curious, being that you're in Canada, and I know that the seasons are so different, and the winters are so different, especially down from compared to where I'm at. Do you feel like flower sales play a bigger role in just people's mental health and things? Especially during the winter months, like for us, sometimes, you have the holidays, but then it kind of tapers down a little bit in business leading up to Valentine's. Is it that way for you guys, or does it actually continue? Maybe not strong is not the word, but steady still.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely notice uh, an increase in just the everyday sales in the winter, because in the summertime, um, people have their gardens. There's the flower farmers. They'll be selling at the flower market, so they can go and get their groceries and get a little bunch of flowers, and that sort of thing. So they might not buy from a flower shop because they'd rather support the flower farmers, which is totally awesome. I mean, we support them too, so. But yeah, they look outside and they see the gardens, or they have their own gardens, so they don't, and they're in a good mood because it's summertime. It's such a drastic difference as soon as we get that little bit of spring weather come March, April, like people's mood just changes completely. And usually January, February, people are really grouchy, they're sick of it, and they take it out on everybody around them. So but definitely people like to have those bright flowers sitting on their dining table just to get them through winter.
Yeah, no, I would totally be that way. So that's why I was curious. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well,
And same with plants too. Like we sell
yeah,
a lot of plants, and definitely more so in the winter time, just to bring some life into their house.
right. Have some little green friends. I'm
Yeah.
a big proponent for that. I we've talked about a lot of different things. A lot of it is revolved around employees and business and stuff like that. And I always like to wrap up with an advice question. Before we get to that, though, I was really excited to hear. I know when we initially spoke, like we mentioned earlier, was several months ago. But since then, you're actually putting some of these things together, and you're starting on building a course. I heard. So,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, I think it's a great idea because so many people need help with this. You have
Mm-hmm.
you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So when we spoke was when I started with my kind of preliminary ideas, and the more I kind of sat with it and slept on it, I was like, oh, I can add a little bit more to those notes. Oh, what about this side? Oh, what about this side? And now it's come into all of these pages of notes that I've put into different sections and that. And I'm like, wow, this is now a course. Like having it in writing was kind of more for me as I'm going through the training, but I'm like, okay, it's in writing. It's something valuable that other people could use for themselves, because like, with everything that we've said, it is a very time consuming process writing out the employee training manual and the questions you're going to ask during the interview and the evaluation process and all that kind of stuff. So I've already done it. So I'm like, okay, well, this is probably very valuable to somebody who doesn't have all the
Right.
time in the world to write all of these manuals and things. So so yeah, I'm creating it into a course, and yeah, hope to launch it in the next few months.
Well, that's awesome. I'll have to look forward to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you're right, though. I mean, it's a huge time saver for people,
Yes.
especially if they have flower shops and things. So,
Mhm.
but I mean, I'm sure some of it can apply to other stuff too. Well, I always
Mhm.
love to, end with that advice question. And so I'm kind of curious what piece of advice you might have for our listeners that's either something on your heart or something that's meant a lot to you.
Mhm. So my advice is probably one that most people have heard, which is to go with your gut feeling. I've found that it never steers me in the wrong direction. So as it applies to hiring, if someone isn't vibing well with you, that's probably not going to change. So go with that gut feeling. And if it's in the interview process, then it's an easy no. If you've already hired them and they're in that probation period, then just move on with somebody else. Don't put in any more hours training them when you're not going to change overnight. So it's very much the same as like red flags with brides. When brides email you like a 10-page email with the exact shade of pink the roses need to be and the color of the linens and this, you're like, okay, I'm gonna say that I'm fully booked for that day. So it's very much that same thing. So listen to those red flags and kind of let that steer you.
No, I can appreciate that. I know a lot of times it's hard to do though. It really is hard to
Mm,
do, to just own that, recognize that, and then
mm,
act on it.
mm.
Have you found? I don't know if this is a fair question. Have you found that there is a way that you go about letting somebody go that um, is not
Well
too,
received.
yeah, well, I guess well received. Sure, we'll go with that.
The answer is no.
Okay.
I've let go two people. The first one went horrible. That person took it very, very personally. And to this day, it's probably like my least favorite moment in my life. But I had to do it. Again, it was my gut feeling saying, this isn't working. Why are you trying to make it work? You're just wasting time basically. So it was a decision I had to make. It was the hardest decision, but I made it. The second one, it was a lot easier. It was during the person's probation period, and it was just they took the news all right, and that was that. So I've
Uh,
had both good and bad.
well, that's just part of it. So, anyway, well, Mandy, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast. I really appreciate it, and I hope that our listeners have learned some tips in dealing with employees through our chat.
Thank you so much, Scott, for putting attention to the topic, and hopefully some florists out there got some good tidbits out of it.